The sound of expensive, vintage silk ripping apart is a noise that stays with you forever. It is a sharp, violent sound, almost like a person screaming in a very high pitch. I walked into the guest room of my own house, expecting to find my cat sleeping on the bed in a patch of sunlight. Instead, I found my 24-year-old sister, Chloe, standing over the mattress like a vandal. In her right hand, she gripped a pair of heavy, sharp kitchen scissors. The silver metal blades caught the light from the ceiling lamp, looking like a weapon. Scattered across the clean white blanket were jagged, ugly strips of emerald green silk. It was my custom-made, $6,000 vintage Valentino gown. It was a piece of art I had saved for 3 years to buy, working extra hours and skipping vacations. Chloe wasn't sorry at all. She didn't look guilty or like she had been caught doing something wrong. She was out of breath, her chest moving up and down from the exertion, and her face was twisted in a mean, satisfied sneer. There, she breathed out, tossing a cut strap of silk at my feet with a quick, dismissive flick of her wrist. Now you can't wear it. You are not going to walk into my wedding week looking like that. You're supposed to be the older sister, not whatever this desperate attempt at youth is. My knees hit the hardwood floor hard. I didn't scream. I couldn't find the air to make a sound. I just stared at the ruined dress, unable to understand the absolute cruelty of my own sister. My name is Elena. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 20 years, I have been the invisible wallet that keeps this family afloat. I work as a high-end interior designer for wealthy clients. It is a career I built from scratch after I missed my own high school prom and my college graduation. I had to miss those important life events to work double shifts at a diner when my dad lost his job in the late 90s. I never got the princess moment that other girls talk about. I never got the spotlight or the fancy parties. This green dress was supposed to be it. It was my armor for a big industry party happening the night before Chloe's wedding. But Chloe is the miracle baby my parents had when I was leaving for college. She has never been told no in her entire life. Standing over the ruins of my dress, the shock began to fade slowly. It was replaced by a cold, heavy realization that settled in my gut. My sister didn't just want to be the bride. She wanted to be the only woman in the room who mattered. She saw my success not as something good for the family, but as a threat to her. She looked at me with pure hate, wiping her hands on her jeans like touching my things made her dirty. You can buy something from the mall, she said with a shrug. Something beige. Something that fits you. My mother, Patricia, rushed into the room a few seconds later. She had heard Chloe shouting from down the hall. I expected her to be horrified at the scene. I expected her to grab the scissors and scold her daughter for destroying my personal property. Instead, she looked at the pieces of green silk on the bed, then at me, and sighed. It was a long, tired breath that told me clearly that I was the problem. Elena, honestly, she said, stepping right over the destroyed fabric to hug a crying Chloe. Why did you bring such a flashy thing into the house during her special week? You know how stressed she is right now. You provoked this. My father, Richard, appeared in the doorway a moment later. He nodded his head as he looked at the mess on the bed. It's just a dress, I'll stop making a scene. We'll get you something nice and modest from the department store. You don't need to look like a movie star. It's your sister's time to shine, not yours. They were comforting the person who did the damage. They were hugging the person who had just destroyed thousands of dollars of my property. They treated her like the victim because the sight of my nice things had stressed her out. I had lived with this dynamic for years, but seeing it so clearly over the ruin of my silk gown finally broke something deep inside me. I went completely numb inside. It is a way I learned to survive years ago when dealing with their constant demands and insults. While I silently gathered the scraps of my gown, placing them into a plastic trash bag with shaking hands, Chloe wiped her dry eyes. She looked at me, testing the waters. She wanted to see if I would explode or yell or fight back. When I didn't, she felt brave. She mistook my silence for giving up. Since you saved money by not needing that expensive dress anymore, she said, her voice steady and demanding, you can pay for the rush shipping on the new bridesmaid shoes I want. The old ones don't match the napkins exactly, and I found a better pair online. She held out her hand, palm up. She expected my credit card to appear like magic, just like it always did whenever she wanted something. The boldness was so sharp it almost hurt more than the destroyed dress. She had just destroyed my property and was asking for more money in the same breath. I'll think about it, I said. My voice sounded hollow and far away to my own ears. Just get out of my room. All of you. They left, whispering about my bad attitude, leaving me alone with the trash. They thought they had won. They thought I was beaten down again. That night, I sat in my home office with the door locked tight. I stared at my bank records on the computer screen. The blue light lit up the dark room, casting shadows on the walls. I didn't cry. I did math. There it was, waiting in my outgoing list, a cashier's check for $55,000. It was the final payment for the Grand Manor, the super fancy venue Chloe had demanded for her big day. My parents had promised me that they would pay me back when their investments paid off. It was a lie we all pretended to believe to keep the peace. I looked at the check number, 405. Then I looked at the pile of green rags in the corner of the room. The math in my head changed. For years, I had paid for their cars, their vacations, and their debts. I had paid for Chloe's college tuition. I was paying for this entire wedding. And in return, I was treated like a bank machine that occasionally needed to be kicked to work faster. They didn't love me. They loved that I was useful. By destroying the one thing that was just for me, Chloe proved that my happiness meant nothing to them. I finally saw the bank screen for what it was, a list of how they used me. The next morning, 3 days before the wedding, I started using the gray rock method. This means you become boring, unemotional, and don't react to anything. When Mom called at 8 a.m. to ask if I had ordered the fast shipping for the shoes, I simply said, it is handled. I didn't say how it was handled. I didn't tell her I hadn't bought them. I just gave a vague answer that let them think what they wanted. When Dad texted me the schedule for the rehearsal dinner, demanding I bring 3 cases of expensive wine because he forgot to budget for it, I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. They thought my silence meant I was obeying them. They were used to me rolling over, taking the bad treatment, and opening my wallet to fix things. They thought I was just sad and pouting before falling back in line like a good daughter. They had no idea I was actually planning my move. I went to work, I did my job, and I waited. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was a cold, hard block of ice in my chest. I was no longer their daughter or sister. I was a ghost in their machine, silently watching the gears turn before I broke them. I drove to the Grand Manor alone on my lunch break. I needed to see it one last time. I needed to understand how big the thing I was about to do really was. The venue coordinator was a nice woman named Sarah. She didn't know anything about the war in my family. She walked me through the ballroom with a big smile. It's going to be magical, Elena, she said happily, pointing to the crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling. And thank you again for saying yes to the last-minute champagne tower and the customized sculpture. Chloe said you'd pay the extra $5,000, so we added it to the final bill. I stopped in the middle of the dance floor. I hadn't said yes to anything. Chloe had faked my approval. She assumed my credit card was an endless pit of money she could use whenever she wanted. It is a beautiful venue, I said softly, looking at the heavy velvet curtains and the crystal glasses. It's a real shame. The coordinator looked confused and tilted her head. A shame? Is something wrong? I smiled, tight and cold, burying my rage deep inside. Nothing at all. Just looking at the view. I walked out, knowing that the champagne tower would never be poured and the ice would never be carved. I left the venue and went straight to my lawyer's office downtown. I needed to be 100% sure before I started my plan. If I stop payment on a gift, I asked him, sitting across from his large wooden desk, can they sue me? Is it against the law? He looked at the contracts I had brought with me and adjusted his glasses. The venue contract is signed by your parents, Richard and Patricia Davis. You are just a third-party payer. You have no legal duty to finish the payment unless you signed a specific paper with the venue. I hadn't. My parents had wanted the glory of having their names on the contract. They wanted to pretend they were the big spenders hosting this fancy party, even if it was my money paying for it. Their pride was about to be their trap. So, if the check doesn't clear, the broken contract is their fault? I asked. Correct, he said. They are the ones who owe the bill. I nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. The trap was set, and they had built it themselves with their own pride. I thanked him and walked out into the bright sunlight, feeling stronger than I had in years. I knew exactly what I had to do next. The text message came from Chloe late that afternoon. It read, rehearsal dinner is at 6 p.m. sharp at the Chop House. Don't wear anything that grabs attention. Black or beige only. No sparkles. And bring the checkbook, the florist needs a tip and I forgot to get cash. There was no please. There was no thank you. It was just orders barked at a servant she assumed would obey. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked tired. I looked worn down by years of being ignored and used. But my eyes were bright. They were burning with a secret that kept me standing tall. I went to my closet and pulled out a simple, shapeless beige dress. It was exactly what she asked for. It was the kind of dress you wear to blend into the background, to be invisible. I put it on, smoothing the fabric down. It would be the last time I ever followed her orders. I grabbed my purse, but I purposely left my checkbook in the drawer. The florist wasn't going to get a tip from me. No one was getting anything from me ever again. I was walking into the lion's den, but this time, I wasn't the food. I was the hunter. The dinner was at a very expensive steakhouse downtown. It was the kind of place with white tablecloths, heavy silver forks, and waiters in tuxedos. I sat at the far end of the long table. I was near the swinging kitchen doors where the noise of dishes clattering was loud and annoying. My parents sat at the head of the table. They were smiling as relatives raised glasses to toast their generosity for hosting such a fancy wedding week. Every time someone said something nice about the venue or the wine, my dad puffed out his chest. He accepted the praise as if he earned it. Only the best for our Chloe, he bragged, raising his glass of expensive red wine. We wanted to give her the world. I took a sip of my ice water. I hadn't paid for this dinner. Dad had put it on his credit card. He had maxed it out completely. He assumed I'd simply pay off his balance next week like I always did. He was spending money he didn't have. He was banking on me saving him, but help wasn't coming. The steak tasted like dust in my mouth. I watched them show off, living a lie paid for by my hard work. Halfway through dessert, Chloe stood up to speak. She tapped her glass with a fork, demanding everyone be quiet. She looked beautiful, I had to admit, but her eyes were mean and hard. I just want to thank my parents, she said, crying fake tears. For making my dreams come true. You guys are my rock. Then she turned her eyes to the end of the table where I sat in my boring beige dress. And to Elena. The room turned to look at me. I got ready for the hit. For finally stepping back and letting me have my moment. I know it's hard for you being single and older, without a life of your own. But I appreciate you trying to fit in and not make this about you. The table chuckled. It was a polite, pity laugh from the extended family. My aunt patted my hand like she felt sorry for me. That was it. That was the final straw. She couldn't just take the money. She had to embarrass me too. She had to remind everyone that I was the loser sister, even though I was the one paying for the champagne she was holding. Mark, the groom, found me outside on the patio afterwards. He was a decent man. He was an accountant who was quiet and kind. I always felt he was just getting run over by my family, swept up in Chloe's storm. "Hey," he said, looking uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. That toast was harsh. "I'm sorry she said that. Are you okay? You've been really quiet all night." I looked at him with real sadness. He was marrying into a nest of snakes and he didn't even know half of it. "I'm fine, Mark." "Really? But do me a favor?" He looked at me, confused. "What?" "Read the papers before you sign them," I said softly, stepping closer. "Financials, marriage licenses, loan documents. Everything. Don't trust what they tell you. Read the fine print." He frowned. He sensed the seriousness in my voice but didn't understand why I was saying it. "What does that mean, Elena?" "Just read," I said. Then I walked away into the shadows of the parking lot. I left him with a warning he would soon understand. It was the only kindness I could offer him before the world fell apart. I went back inside to grab my purse and heard voices coming from the private booth next to ours. The velvet curtain wasn't fully pulled shut. It was Mom and Dad. They were whispering fast and quiet. "It's fine, Richard," Mom was saying. "After the honeymoon, when things settle down, we'll ask Elena to sign over the deed to the lake cabin. We can sell it to cover the high-interest loans we took for the engagement ring and the deposit." "She'll do it," Dad replied. His voice was slurry from the wine. "She always does. She's desperate for us to like her. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her if we tell her it helps the family." My blood turned to absolute ice. The lake cabin was the one thing I bought solely for myself 5 years ago. It was my safe place. They weren't just using me for cash. They were planning to steal my assets to cover their own reckless spending. The betrayal was total. They viewed me as nothing more than an animal to be used up. I stood there for a moment, letting the hate fill me up, making me strong. I sat in my car in the dark parking lot. The engine was running, and the heater was blasting against the evening chill. The clock on the dashboard read 8 p.m. The cashier's check was scheduled to go through at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. That was exactly 24 hours before the wedding ceremony was set to begin. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank's 24-hour fraud line. I knew the number by heart. After passing the security questions and checking my identity with my voice code, I gave the command. "I need to stop payment on check number 405, I said, my voice steady. Amount, $55,000. To the Grand Manor. The agent paused, typing on the other end. "May I ask the reason for the stop payment, ma'am?" "This is a large amount." I looked back at the dark restaurant windows where my family was laughing at me and planning to sell my home. "The funds were misappropriated," I said clearly. "Process it immediately." "Done," the agent said. "The check is void." I hung up. I felt the finality of the button press. It was done. The bomb was armed and ticking. The next morning, the day before the wedding, was scary because it was so quiet. I went to my design studio. I had a client meeting at 10. I picked up fabric samples for a nursery and talked about lights for a downtown apartment. I acted perfectly normal. I smiled at the right times and took notes. My phone sat on my desk, screen down, silent mode off. I knew exactly what was happening in the background. The banking system was talking to the venue's bank. The rejection notice was traveling through the computer lines. The venue manager was getting a notification on his screen. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy backpack after a long hike. I wasn't scared. I wasn't anxious. I was relieved. The cord was cut. The duty was gone. I was finally, truly free from the weight of their expectations. The silence of the phone was the calm before the storm, and I enjoyed every second of it. I sipped my coffee and waited for the world to catch up to what I had done. At 2 p.m., the silence broke. My phone lit up. MOM flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. Then Dad. Then CHLOE. Then MOM again. It buzzed non-stop. It vibrated across the wooden desk like an angry bee, dancing toward the edge. I let it ring for 10 minutes straight. I sipped my coffee and watched the names flash by. Finally, I picked it up. I put on my best, confused and busy voice. Hello? I'm in a meeting, I can't talk long. The check bounced. My mother screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Her voice was torn apart with panic. She didn't sound like the fancy woman from dinner. The venue manager is here. He says the check was rejected. They are threatening to lock the doors. They say there isn't enough money. Fix it, Elena. Fix it now. Transfer the money. Calm down, I said, my heart beating steady. I'll come over and we can sort it out. I hung up before she could scream again. I gathered my things slowly, taking my time to put my pens away neatly. I was in no rush. I drove the speed limit to the house. When I pulled into my driveway, their cars were already there. They were parked messy on the lawn, tearing up the grass. They were waiting on my porch like an angry mob. Chloe was breathing fast, pacing back and forth, holding her phone tight. Dad was red-faced. The veins were popping out in his neck. He looked like he was ready to punch a hole in the wall. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Dad yelled as I stepped out of my car. The manager thinks we're broke. Write another check. Now. Wire it. We don't have time for your banking errors. I walked past them, unlocked my front door, and invited them into the living room. Sit down, I said. The power in my voice surprised them. They were used to me apologizing. They were used to me rushing to fix mistakes. They sat, looking confused and angry. This isn't an error, I said, standing by the fireplace. I loomed over them for the first time in my life, feeling 10 feet tall. I'm not writing another check, I said. My voice was calm and reached the back of the room. I stopped the payment. The silence was total. It was heavy and hard to breathe in. What? Chloe whispered. Her face went pale, and her eyes got wide. Why? Are you crazy? I reached behind the sofa and pulled out the clear plastic bag holding the shredded green Valentino dress. I threw it onto the coffee table with a wet thud. Because you destroyed my property, I said. Because you embarrassed me in front of our family. And because I heard you last night planning to trick me into giving you my lake cabin to pay your debts. I looked at my parents. I met their eyes for the first time in years as an equal. The bank is closed to you. The Bank of Elena is permanently closed. Find someone else to pay. I am done paying for my own abuse. The truth of the situation began to hit them, but they still couldn't believe I would actually do it. They looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Chloe jumped up. She didn't attack me physically, she attacked the room with pure rage. She grabbed a vase from the side table and threw it on the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. You jealous hag, she screamed. Her face twisted into something ugly. You're ruining my life because no one wants to marry you. You're jealous because I'm happy and you're alone. She screamed until her throat was sore. She stomped her feet like a toddler denied a toy. You have to pay. It's my day. You owe me this. Mom tried the guilt trip. Tears streamed down her face. Elena, you can't do this to family. People are flying in from across the country. Think of the shame. Think of the scandal. You should have thought of the scandal when you let her cut up my dress and laughed about it, I replied coldly. You have 20 hours until the wedding. I suggest you start calling guests. I watched them crumble, realizing that their guilt trips had no power over me anymore. The spell was broken. The venue manager called Dad's phone while we were arguing. Dad put it on speaker. His hands were shaking bad. Mr. Davis, the voice said. It was professional and icy. Since the funds have been withdrawn and the deadline has passed, we are giving the date to a corporate client on our waiting list. They are ready to wire the funds right now. Unless we receive a certified wire transfer for the full amount plus a late fee in 30 minutes, your contract is void. Dad looked at me. Desperation was in his eyes, and his toughness was gone. Elena, please. Don't do this. We can't fix this. We don't have the money. I checked my watch. I have a gala to get to, I said. I have to go buy a dress since mine is in strips on your coffee table. I turned around and walked out. I literally walked out of my own house, got in my car, and drove to a luxury hotel downtown. I left them in the mess they had created, without looking back once. I turned off my phone. I checked into a suite with a view of the city. But I heard the full story later from a cousin who was on my side. They couldn't get a loan. Their credit was ruined from co-signing Chloe's student loans that she never paid back. They called every relative. They called uncles and distant aunts, begging for cash. But no one had $55,000 ready on a Friday afternoon. The venue canceled the contract at 5 p.m. They lost the deposit. They lost the ice sculpture. They lost the champagne tower. They had to send a mass text to 150 guests. They had to say the wedding location had changed from the Grand Manor to the Davis backyard. That was my parents' small property with patchy grass and a septic tank problem. The embarrassment was total. The chaos was everywhere. They spent the night trying to rent tents, but everything was booked. They were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. I showed up to the wedding. It was a power move. I went to a high-end store that morning and bought a sleek, blood-red jumpsuit. It was modern, sharp, and fierce. I looked like a CEO, not a bridesmaid. I arrived just as guests were trying to walk through the mud. The backyard was a disaster. It had rained that morning, turning the lawn into a mud pit. The white heels of the bridesmaids were sinking into the soft earth. There was no music because they couldn't afford the DJ without my money. He had packed up and left. Chloe looked wild. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, and her makeup was sweating off. When she saw me walking up the driveway, she froze. The guests were whispering behind their hands. They knew something big had happened. The difference between the promised luxury and the muddy reality was huge. I stood on the patio, dry and calm, watching the circus. I felt like a queen surveying a ruined kingdom. During the reception, the food was pizza because the fancy caterer also cancelled. Dad cornered me by the plastic drinks cooler. He was drunk on cheap beer and swaying slightly. You think you won, he sneered, leaning into my face. His breath smelled bad. You think you're so smart. But we still have this house. We're still standing. And you're out of the will. I took a sip of my drink, not bothered at all. Actually, Richard, you don't. I opened my purse and pulled out a folded paper. Remember 3 years ago when you were facing foreclosure? You signed the title over to the LLC to save it? You thought it was just a formality. I held it up. I own the LLC. I own this house. And since you threatened to sue me yesterday, here is your 30-day notice to move out. His eyes bulged as he realized how big his mistake was. He realized he had just picked a fight with his landlord. The color drained from his face. He looked like he was having a stroke. But the real blow came from the side. Mark, the groom, had been standing behind the fence. He was smoking a cigarette to calm his nerves. He heard everything. He heard about the cabin plot, the foreclosure, the debt, and the LLC. He looked at Chloe, who was currently screaming at a waiter for dropping a pizza box. He looked at my parents, who were exposed as liars. He walked over to the table where the marriage license was waiting to be signed. He picked it up. He looked at me, gave a small, sad nod, and ripped it in half. It was just like Chloe had ripped my dress. He dropped the pieces in the mud. "I'm not signing this," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not marrying into this fraud. The party is over." He walked to his car and drove away, leaving Chloe screaming in the mud, her dream day turning into a nightmare. 6 months later, I walked the red carpet at the National Design Awards. I was wearing a new custom gown. It was gold this time, armored and glittering under the lights. I won Designer of the Year. In my acceptance speech, I thanked the challenges that forced me to value my own worth. My phone buzzed in my purse as I walked off stage. I checked it. A blocked number. I knew it was them. They were living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. They were drowning in debt and suing each other over the mess. Chloe was single and working in a retail store. I didn't even read the voicemail they left. I handed my phone to my assistant. "Delete that," I said. I smiled at the camera, adjusted my gold dress, and walked into the light. I had finally outshined them all. I didn't do it by destroying them. I did it by simply refusing to be destroyed myself. I was free, wealthy, and finally, visibly happy.